Chapter 10, Part 2 of The Voyage of the Beagle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rob Whelan. The Voyage of the Beagle by Charles Darwin. Chapter 10, Tierra del Fuego, Part 2. After having been detained 6 days in Wigwam Cove by very bad weather, we put to sea on the 30th of December. Captain Fitzroy wished to get westward, to land York and Fuego in their own country. When at sea we had a constant succession of gales, and the current was against us. We drifted to 57 degrees 23 minutes south. On the 11th of January, 1833, by carrying a press of sail, we fetched within a few miles of the great rugged mountain of York Minster, so called by Captain Cook, and the origin of the name of the elder Fuegian, when a violent squall compelled us to shorten sail and stand out to sea. The surf was breaking fearfully on the coast, and the spray was carried over a cliff estimated to 200 feet in height. On the 12th the gale was very heavy, and we did not know exactly where we were. It was a most unpleasant sound to hear constantly repeated, "Keep a good lookout to leeward." On the 13th the storm raged with its full fury. Our horizon was narrowly limited by the sheets of spray borne by the wind. The sea looked ominous, like a dreary waving plain with patches of drifted snow. Whilst the ship laboured heavily, the albatross glided with its expanded wings right up the wind. At noon a great sea broke over us, and filled one of the whaleboats, which was obliged to be instantly cut away. The poor Beagle trembled at the shock, and for a few minutes would not obey her helm, but soon, like a good ship that she was, she righted and came up to the wind again. Had another sea followed the first, our fate would have been decided soon and for ever. We had now been 24 days trying in vain to get westward. The men were worn out with fatigue, and they had not had many nights or days a dry thing to put on. Captain Fitzroy gave up the attempt to get westward by the outside coast. In the evening we ran in behind False Cape Horn, and dropped our anchor in 47 fathoms, fire flashing from the windlass as the chain rushed round it. How delightful was that still night, after having been so long involved in the din of the warring elements! January 15th, 1833. The Beagle anchored in Goree Roads. Captain Fitzroy having resolved to settle the Fuegians, according to their wishes, in Ponsonby Sound, 4 boats were equipped to carry them there through the Beagle Channel. This channel, which was discovered by Captain Fitzroy during the last voyage, is a most remarkable feature in the geography of this or indeed any other country. It may be compared to the valley of Loch Ness in Scotland, with its chain of lakes and friths. It is about 120 miles long, with an average breadth, not subject to any very great variation, of about 2 miles, and is throughout the greater part so perfectly straight that the view, bounded on each side by a line of mountains, gradually becomes indistinct in the long distance. It crosses the southern part of Tierra del Fuego in an east and west line, and in the middle is joined at right angles on the south side by an irregular channel, which has been called Ponsonby Sound. This is the residence of Jemmy Button's tribe and family. 19th. 3 whaleboats and the yawl, with a party of 28, started under the command of Captain Fitzroy. In the afternoon we entered the eastern mouth of the channel, and shortly afterwards found a snug little cove concealed by some surrounding islets. Here we pitched our tents and lighted our fires. Nothing could look more comfortable than this scene. The glassy water of the little harbour, with the branches of the trees hanging over the rocky beach, the boats at anchor, the tents supported by the crossed oars, and the smoke curling up the wooded valley, formed a picture of quiet retirement. The next day, 20th, we smoothly glided onwards in our little fleet, and came to a more inhabited district. Few, if any, of these natives could ever have seen a white man. Certainly nothing could exceed their astonishment at the apparition of the 4 boats. Fires were lighted on every point, hence the name of Tierra del Fuego, or the Land of Fire, both to attract our attention and to spread far and wide the news. Some of the men ran for miles along the shore. I shall never forget how wild and savage one group appeared. Suddenly 4 or 5 men came to the edge of an overhanging cliff. They were absolutely naked, and their long hair streamed about their faces. They held rugged staffs in their hands, and springing from the ground they waved their arms round their heads, and sent forth the most hideous yells. At dinner time we landed among a party of Fuegians, At first they were not inclined to be friendly, for until the captain pulled in ahead of the other boats, they kept their slings in their hands. We soon, however, delighted them by trifling presents, such as tying red tape round their heads. They liked our biscuit, but one of the savages touched with his finger some of the meat preserved in tin cases which I was eating, and feeling it soft and cold, showed as much disgust at it as I should have done at putrid blubber. Jemmy was thoroughly ashamed of his countrymen, and declared his own tribe were quite different, in which he was woefully mistaken. It was as easy to please as it was difficult to satisfy these savages. Young and old, men and children, never ceased repeating the word "Jammerschooner," which means "give me." After pointing to almost every object, one after the other, even to the buttons on our coats, and saying their favourite word in as many intonations as possible, they would then use it in a neuter sense, and vacantly repeat "Jammerschooner." After "Jammerschoonering" for any article very eagerly, they would, by a simple artifice, point to their young women or little children, as much as to say, "If you will not give it to me, surely you will to such as these." At night we endeavoured in vain to find an uninhabited cove, and at last were obliged to bivouac not far from a party of natives. They were very inoffensive as long as they were few in numbers, but in the morning, 21st, being joined by others, they showed symptoms of hostility, and we thought that we should have come to a skirmish. An European labours under great disadvantages when treating with savages like these, who have not the least idea of the power of firearms. In the very act of levelling his musket, he appears to the savage far inferior to a man armed with a bow and arrow, a spear, or even a sling. Nor is it easy to teach them our superiority except by striking a fatal blow. Like wild beasts, they do not appear to compare numbers, for each individual, if attacked, instead of retiring, will endeavour to dash your brains out with a stone, as certainly as a tiger, under similar circumstances, would tear you. Captain Fitzroy on one occasion being very anxious, from good reasons, to frighten away a small party, first flourished a cutlass near them, at which they only laughed. He then twice fired his pistol close to a native. The man both times looked astounded, and carefully but quickly rubbed his head. He then stared a while, and gabbled to his companions, but he never seemed to think of running away. We can hardly put ourselves in the position of these savages, and understand their actions. In the case of this Fuegian, the possibility of such a sound as the report of a gun close to his ear could never have entered his mind. He perhaps literally did not for a second know whether it was a sound or a blow, and therefore very naturally rubbed his head. In a similar manner, when a savage sees a mark struck by a bullet, it may be some time before he is able at all to understand how it is effected, for the fact of a body being invisible from its velocity would, perhaps, be to him an idea totally inconceivable. Moreover, the extreme force of a bullet that penetrates a hard substance without tearing it, may convince the savage that it has no force at all. Certainly I believe that many savages of the lowest grade, such as those of Tierra del Fuego, have seen objects struck, and even small animals killed by the musket, without being in the least aware how deadly an instrument it is. 22nd. After having passed an unmolested night in what would appear to be neutral territory between Jemmy's tribe and the people whom we saw yesterday, we sailed pleasantly along. I do not know anything which shows more clearly the hostile state of the different tribes than these wide border or neutral tracts. Although Jemmy Button knew well the force of our party, he was, at first, unwilling to land amidst the hostile tribe nearest to his own. He often told us how the savage Owen's men, "when the leaf red," crossed the mountains from the eastern coast of Tierra del Fuego, and made inroads on the natives of this part of the country. It was most curious to watch him when thus talking, and see his eyes gleaming and his whole face assume a new and wild expression. As we proceeded along the Beagle Channel, the scenery assumed a peculiar and very magnificent character, but the effect was much lessened from the lowness of the points of view in a boat, and from looking along the valley, and thus losing all the beauty in a succession of ridges. The mountains were here about 3,000 feet high, and terminated in sharp and jagged points. They rose in one unbroken sweep from the water's edge, and were covered to the height of 1,400 or 1,500 feet by the dusky coloured forest. It was most curious to observe, as far as the eye could range, how level and truly horizontal the line of the mountainside was, at which trees ceased to grow. It precisely resembled the high water mark of driftweed on a sea beach. At night we slept close to the junction of Ponsonby